The first thing Ethan Cole registered was warmth. An impossible warmth that didn't belong in his climate-controlled apartment. The second thing was the scent. Ancient roses mixed with something metallic, something that made his instincts scream danger even before his conscious mind caught up. His eyes snapped open to the pre-dawn gloom of his bedroom, and for a heartbeat, he thought he was still dreaming. But dreams didn't come with weight. Dreams didn't shift against you with the substance of flesh and bone and something far more profound than either. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as his vision adjusted to the half-light filtering through his reinforced windows. There, occupying the left side of his bed, the side that had been empty when he'd collapsed into exhausted sleep 6 hours ago, lay a woman. But calling her simply a woman would be like calling a supernova simply a light. She was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Her skin possessed the luminescent quality of pearl, so pale it seemed to capture and reflect the faint moonlight still lingering outside. Long silver hair cascaded across his pillow like spilled mercury, each strand catching the dim illumination with an otherworldly sheen. Her features were almost too perfect, too precisely carved, as if some divine sculptor had spent centuries perfecting the architecture of her face. High cheekbones, a straight patrician nose, full lips that even in repose held a hint of something predatory. But it was her attire that truly arrested Ethan's attention and confirmed this was no ordinary intruder, no strange case of somnambulistic bed-sharing. She wore what could only be described as war regalia fused with ceremonial bridal elements, an impossible marriage of violence and devotion. Black leather armor plates covered her torso, each piece engraved with symbols that seemed to writhe in the corner of his vision, ancient runes that his rational mind couldn't quite focus on, that slipped away from comprehension like water through fingers. Crimson fabric woven through the armor created the silhouette of a gown, flowing and elegant despite the martial construction beneath. Her curves were unmistakable even through the armor. A mature woman's body, powerful and voluptuous, built for both battle and beauty. Metallic pauldrons rested on her shoulders, and a heavy cape of midnight fabric draped across his bed like spilled ink, its edges embroidered with more of those impossible symbols that glowed with a faint internal light. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. His mouth had gone dry. Every instinct cultivated by 30 years of life in the megacity of New Athens. Don't trust strangers, report anomalies to the Bureau, never invite unknown entities into your living space, screamed at him to move, to run, to call security. Instead he sat up slowly, the motion causing the bed to shift. The woman's eyes opened. Crimson. Pure, glowing crimson like backlit rubies, like the warning lights on the city's perimeter walls, like fresh blood under laboratory fluorescence. Those eyes fixed on him with an intensity that pinned him more effectively than any physical restraint. There was intelligence in that gaze, ancient and calculating, mixed with something else, satisfaction perhaps. Possession. You're awake, she said, her voice a low contralto that resonated in his chest cavity. It wasn't a question. English, he noted distantly, but with an accent he couldn't place. Something old, something that predated the linguistic databases he'd studied in school. Ethan's voice cracked. He cleared his throat, desperately trying to reassemble the scattered pieces of his composure. Who are you? How did you get in here? This is a secure building. 32nd floor. Biometric locks. Armed security in the lobby. A smile curved those perfect lips, revealing, of course, elongated canines that caught the light like polished ivory daggers. Security, she repeated as if tasting the word. Your modern fortresses are quaint. Effective against thieves and common criminals, perhaps. Less so against those who walked this earth before your cities rose from its bones. Vampire. The word crystallized in Ethan's mind with terrible clarity. The pale skin, the crimson eyes, the predatory grace, the impossible entry, all the folklore, all the horror streams he'd consumed as entertainment, suddenly crashed into the realm of undeniable reality. Vampires were real. And one was in his bed. He should be terrified. He was terrified. But underneath the fear, something else stirred. A wild, irrational curiosity that had always been his greatest weakness and greatest strength. Vampires are extinct, he said, because his brain, when faced with impossibility, defaulted to arguing with it. The Cleansing Wars. 300 years ago. The Alliance wiped out the old species. It's in every history archive. Extinct, she mused, propping herself up on one elbow. The movement was fluid, inhuman in its grace. Her armor didn't clink or scrape as normal metal would. Instead it moved with her like a second skin. Is that what they teach now? How convenient for your alliance. How very clean and simple. Her crimson eyes narrowed slightly. Tell me, Ethan Cole, if my kind is extinct, what am I? The use of his name sent ice down his spine. How do you know who I am? I know everything about you. She sat up fully now, and Ethan realized she was tall, easily matching his own 6 feet, perhaps exceeding it. Your name. Your occupation. Your habits. The fact that you take your synthetic coffee black, that you work 12-hour shifts at the Prometheus archive, that you live alone and prefer it that way, that you fall asleep to historical documentaries because the modern world exhausts you. She tilted her head, silver hair sliding over her armored shoulder. That you possess something that belongs to me. Ethan's mind raced through the inventory of his modest apartment. Research tablets, some vintage books, basic furniture, nothing of value to someone. Something like this. I don't have anything that. You do. She moved with sudden speed, and before Ethan could react, she was kneeling on the bed directly in front of him, close enough that he could feel the impossible chill radiating from her body despite the warmth he'd sensed earlier. Her hand, pale, long-fingered, tipped with black nails filed to subtle points, reached out and pressed against his chest, directly over his heart. Here. You have something of mine right here. For a wild moment, Ethan thought she meant his heart literally, that she intended to tear it from his chest in some vampiric ritual. But her hand remained still, palm flat against his racing heartbeat, her expression almost wistful. I don't understand, he managed. No, she agreed softly. Not yet. But you will. She withdrew her hand, and Ethan felt the loss of contact like a physical ache, which made no sense whatsoever. My name is Seraphine Blackthorn, last war bride of the Crimson Eclipse Covenant, bearer of the Sanguine Oath, survivor of the cleansing, and, her smile turned sharp, as of 3 nights ago, your bride by laws far older than your alliance. My what? Bride. She said it matter-of-factly as if discussing the weather. The bond was sealed when you bled upon the Covenant stone. Did you truly not realize what you were doing? Ethan's mind stuttered, then caught on a memory. 3 nights ago. The archive. That strange artifact they'd uncovered in Sublevel 9 during the dig. The black stone covered in runes similar to the ones adorning Seraphine's armor. He'd been cataloging it, measuring it, and the edge had been sharper than it looked. He'd cut his hand, blood welling up and dripping onto the stone's surface before he could pull away. The stone had absorbed the blood. He'd reported it as a chemical reaction in his log and thought nothing more of it. The Covenant stone, he whispered. That was yours. My sister's. My people's. Seraphine's expression hardened, crimson eyes blazing brighter. Stolen from the Crimson Cathedral during the cleansing and buried beneath your city like shameful garbage. But Covenant stones cannot be destroyed, only hidden. They wait. They remember. And when blood is given freely by one not born of vampire lineage, by one who bears the mark of the old magic dormant in their veins, she gestured between them. The bride bond activates. Ancient law supersedes all others. You called me Ethan Cole whether you meant to or not. And I have answered. This was insane. This was impossible. This was clearly some elaborate hallucination brought on by working too many consecutive shifts in the archive's poorly ventilated sublevels. Ethan opened his mouth to say exactly that when Seraphine moved again, this time swinging her legs off the bed and standing in one smooth motion. The cape billowed around her dramatically as she moved to his window, looking out over the sprawling illuminated grid of New Athens below. From 32 floors up, the city looked like a circuit board come to life. Millions of lights representing millions of lives, all contained within the massive walls that separated civilization from the wilderness beyond. 3 centuries, Seraphine said quietly, her back to him. 3 centuries I have waited in the spaces between, in the shadows your people pretend don't exist. Waiting for the stone to sing again. waiting for the bond to call me back. She turned, and the dawn light now creeping through the window cast her in shades of blue and crimson, highlighting the impossible nature of her existence. The war isn't over, Ethan. The cleansing didn't end anything. It merely forced us to adapt, to hide, to become the myths your historians dismiss. But the old powers are stirring. The balance your alliance imposed is breaking. And you, my dear husband, have just become the most important piece on a battlefield you didn't know existed. Husband. The word landed like a physical blow. Ethan stood on shaking legs, his practical mind trying desperately to find purchase on the situation. I don't accept this. I didn't agree to any marriage. Your laws don't apply to me. The blood says otherwise. Seraphine's expression softened slightly. I understand this is unexpected. You are frightened. Confused. The modern world has taught you that things like me, like the old covenants, like magic itself, are fantasy. But frightened or not, confused or not, the bond exists. I feel your heartbeat as if it were my own. I know your dreams. I can feel your fear and your curiosity warring inside you even now. She took a step toward him. And whether you accept it or not, there are others who will sense the bond. Others who will come for you. Others who view an unwitting human bound to the last war bride as either a threat to be eliminated or a prize to be claimed. Others, Ethan repeated. Other vampires. Vampires. Hunters. Alliance enforcers if they realize what's happened. Old things that even my kind feared. Seraphine was close again, close enough that Ethan could see the faint luminescence of her skin, the way those crimson eyes held depths of power and sadness. You have stumbled into a war that predates your civilization, and the only reason you're still alive is standing before you. The bride bond offers protection. It marks you as mine, and despite my kind's many flaws, we are territorial. The possessive way she said mine sent conflicting signals through Ethan's nervous system. Fear and something else, something he absolutely didn't want to examine. And if I refuse? If I go to the authorities, tell them about you? Then you'll be dead within a day and I'll be hunted shortly thereafter. She said it without emotion. The Alliance doesn't acknowledge things it claims to have exterminated. You'd be declared delusional, possibly infected with some new pathogen, certainly contained and studied. As for me, her smile was cold. There are those within your alliance who know exactly what we are and have spent 3 centuries ensuring we remain extinct in the public mind while hunting us in the shadows. They would very much like to capture a war bride. I assure you I wouldn't survive the experience intact. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. This was too much, too fast, too impossible. But underneath the shock and denial, his analytical mind, the mind that had earned him a position at the Prometheus Archive despite his young age, was beginning to process, to strategize. If even a fraction of what Seraphine said was true, he was already involved. The bond existed or it didn't, but either way he bled on that stone. He triggered something. And running to authorities who might be compromised or disbelieving seemed like a good way to end up dead or disappeared. So what now? He asked, surprising himself with how steady his voice had become. If I'm apparently married to a vampire war bride and about to be hunted by multiple factions, what exactly do we do? Seraphine's expression shifted to something that might have been approval. Now you listen. Now you learn. Now you decide if you want to be a victim of the coming storm or a survivor of it. She extended her hand, palm up, in a gesture that somehow bridged the gap between ancient chivalry and modern partnership. The old war is reigniting, Ethan Cole. The Covenant Stone resurfacing is not coincidence, it's an omen. Powers thought long dead are awakening. And you and I, bound by blood and oath, stand at the center of it all. Ethan looked at her hand, at the impossible woman offering it, at the choice being presented. Behind him lay his ordinary life, safe, predictable, small. Before him lay something dangerous, insane and vast. Every reasonable impulse screamed to reject this, to call for help, to pretend this wasn't happening. Instead, he found himself thinking of all the history he'd studied, all the gaps and inconsistencies in the official records of the cleansing wars, all the sealed sections in the archive he'd never been allowed to access. He thought of the boredom that had settled over his life like dust, The feeling that he was cataloging a dead past while living a dead present. Ethan took Seraphine's hand. Her skin was cool against his but not unpleasant. The moment contact was made, he felt something surge through him. A connection, electric and profound, like a circuit completing. In that instant, he felt her presence in his mind, not invasive but there, a second heartbeat that somehow harmonized with his own. "Show me," he said. "Show me everything I don't know." Seraphine's smile was radiant and terrifying. "As you wish, husband. Welcome to the real world." The coffee maker hummed its familiar morning melody, a sound so mundane and normal that it created a bizarre counterpoint to the armored vampire standing in Ethan's kitchen. Seraphine had insisted they begin with what she called civilized discourse, which apparently meant coffee for him and a blood pack, produced from somewhere within her cape, for her. "You're not going to bite me?" Ethan had asked, trying to keep his voice neutral as he measured out the synthetic grounds. "Not without permission," Seraphine had replied with a hint of amusement. "I'm a war bride, not a feral beast. We have protocols. Besides, the bond makes your blood complicated. Drinking from you would deepen our connection in ways you're not prepared for." Now, sitting across from her at his small dining table, watching her sip delicately from an opaque container while dawn fully broke over New Athens outside, Ethan felt the surreality of the situation settle into a strange kind of acceptance. His mind, always quick to adapt when presented with new information, was beginning to shift from denial to analysis. "Start at the beginning," he said. "The real beginning. Before the cleansing." Seraphine set down her container, and for a moment her crimson eyes seemed to look past him, past the walls, past the city, into a distant memory. "The beginning is older than you can imagine. My kind, true vampires, not the infected carriers your horror streams depict. We are ancient. We existed before humanity built its first cities, before you discovered fire, before you were more than clever apes with delusions of grandeur." There was no malice in her words, just statement of fact. "We were fewer than you always, but longer lived, stronger, possessed of abilities your science still cannot explain." "Magic," Ethan said. "Power," Seraphine corrected. "Call it magic if you like, but it's as real as gravity, as electricity, as any force your scientists measure. We could manipulate what you call reality in small ways. Move through shadows. Influence minds. Heal rapidly. Survive without aging. And yes, we required blood to sustain ourselves, though not in the quantities your stories suggest." She stood, moving to his window again, her cape flowing behind her like liquid shadow. "For millennia we coexisted with humanity. Sometimes we were gods in your mythologies. Sometimes we were monsters in your cautionary tales. Mostly we stayed hidden, taking what we needed carefully, living in the spaces you didn't occupy. We had our own societies, our own laws, our own politics. The covenants were our governing bodies, each one representing different bloodlines, different philosophies of how to interact with humanity." "And the Crimson Eclipse Covenant?" Ethan prompted when she paused. "My covenant believed in balance. We neither ruled over humans nor hid from them in complete secrecy. We sought partnership, though it was a radical idea at the time. We protected human settlements from threats they couldn't face. Darker things than vampires have always existed in this world. In return, we were given tribute, including blood from willing donors. It worked for a time. Centuries even." Seraphine turned back to face him, and her expression had hardened. "But balance is difficult to maintain. Other covenants were less benevolent. Some treated humans as cattle. Some created networks of infected thralls, not true vampires, but diseased humans with a fraction of our abilities and none of our restraint. These thralls spread like plagues, creating the monsters your legends remember. By the time the Industrial Revolution arrived, by the time humanity had developed technologies that could rival our innate powers, trust had eroded completely." "The cleansing," Ethan said quietly. "The cleansing," Seraphine confirmed, her voice heavy. 300 years ago, humanity united under the Alliance banner and declared war on all non-human entities. They had weapons we'd never faced, sunlight cannons that burned us to ash, UV grenades, blood toxins, genetic markers that could identify us in crowds. They were thorough and merciless. Covenant after covenant fell. Vampires who had lived for thousands of years burned in a single afternoon. The infected thralls were hunted to extinction. Ancient sanctuaries were destroyed. Knowledge was buried or burned. She moved back to the table, sitting down with a heaviness that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. The Crimson Eclipse Covenant was among the last to fall. We fought, tried to negotiate, tried to prove we weren't the enemy. It didn't matter. The Alliance wanted a clean narrative. Humans good, monsters bad, war won. My sisters. My war sisters, women I had fought beside for 300 years before the cleansing even began, they fell one by one. The Covenant Stone, our most sacred relic, the anchor of our collective power and our marriage traditions, was stolen and buried. The stone I bled on, Ethan said. Yes. A Covenant Stone serves many purposes. It stores power. It anchors spells. It binds oaths. Seraphine's gaze fixed on him with renewed intensity. And it facilitates the war bride bond, our most sacred marriage rite. When a vampire warrior gives themselves completely to their covenant, they become war brides, living weapons bound to the defense of their people. We take no individual mate unless the Covenant Stone itself recognizes a worthy partner. The stone tests bloodlines, magical resonance, compatibility of spirit. It's not random, Ethan. The stone doesn't sing for just anyone. But I'm human, Ethan protested. I'm nobody. I'm an archivist with no combat training and no magical bloodline. Are you certain? Seraphine leaned forward. Your mother's lineage, have you traced it back? Your father's? Ethan hesitated. Truth was, he'd grown up in the state orphanage system. No parents, no records before age 3. He'd always assumed they were dead or had abandoned him. I don't know my lineage. Then perhaps the stone knows something you don't. Seraphine reached across the table, not quite touching him but close. Magic recognizes magic, even when it's dormant, even when it's diluted across generations. Somewhere in your ancestry there is power. The stone sensed it. When you bled, when you gave freely without coercion, the ancient protocols activated. I felt it 3 nights ago, like a bell ringing in my soul after 3 centuries of silence. I followed the call and it led me here. To you. Ethan's mind raced through the implications. Dormant magic. Hidden lineage. Bride bonds. 3 days ago, his biggest worry had been inventory discrepancies in Archive Sublevel 7. Now he was apparently married to an ancient vampire with mysterious powers he didn't know he possessed. You said others would come, he said, forcing himself to focus on the practical threat. Oh. How soon? Good. Focus on survival first. Seraphine's expression became tactical. The bond creates a signature, a resonance that others with the right sensitivity can detect. The Alliance's Enforcer Division, they're not entirely human anymore, augmented with technology and forbidden genetic modifications. They monitor for exactly these sorts of anomalies. When a magical event occurs in their precious clean city, they investigate. I've hidden my presence as much as possible, but the initial bond activation 3 nights ago would have registered somewhere. And other vampires? There are more of us than the Alliance admits, though we are scattered, hidden, diminished. Some have formed new covenants in the wilderness beyond the walls. Some hide alone in the city's depths. Some have made dark bargains to survive. When word spreads that a Covenant Stone has awakened, that a war bride has claimed a mate, she smiled without humor, it will draw attention. Some will see us as symbols of hope, the old powers returning. Others will see us as threats to the careful balance they've struck in hiding. And some will simply want the power the stone represents. Ethan rubbed his face, exhaustion and adrenaline warring in his system. This is insane. Yesterday my biggest problem was deciding what to watch before bed. Now I'm allegedly married with a target on my back from multiple supernatural factions and a secret government agency. Yes, Seraphine agreed simply. Your life has become complicated. But I meant what I said, you can be a victim or a survivor. I prefer the latter, and I suspect you do as well. She stood, and this time when she extended her hand, it wasn't in partnership but in summons. Come. If you're to survive what's coming, you need to understand what you've become. The bond isn't just ceremonial, It changes you, gives you access to abilities you didn't have before. You need training quickly. And I need to assess exactly what the stone saw in you. Ethan looked at her hand, then at his apartment around him. The safe, small space he built for his safe, small life. He thought about going to work today, pretending this hadn't happened, filing his reports and cataloging artifacts and living half alive. He took her hand and stood. What kind of training? Seraphine's smile was predatory and proud. The kind that might keep you alive. Clear some space. We're going to discover what you're capable of. The next 2 hours shattered several of Ethan's fundamental assumptions about reality and himself. Seraphine moved his modest furniture with casual supernatural strength, creating an open space in his living room. Then she began to teach him what the bride bond had actually done to him. The bond is symbiotic, she explained, moving through a series of stretches that should have been impossible in her armor but somehow weren't. You gain some of what I am. Enhanced reflexes, though nothing like mine. Improved healing. Greater resistance to injury and illness. And most importantly, access to what we call the shadow sense. Which is awareness of the supernatural world layered over yours. Watch. Seraphine gestured, and suddenly Ethan could see, actually see, threads of crimson light connecting her to him, pulsing in time with their heartbeats. More than that, he could see faint symbols glowing on the walls of his apartment, protective wards he'd never noticed. The morning sunlight streaming through his window seemed to carry visible currents of energy. I see it, he breathed, wonder overriding his fear. How am I seeing this? The bond opened your perception. This is how I see the world always. Every living thing leaves traces. Every magical working creates patterns. You're seeing reality unfiltered now. She moved closer, and in his new vision she was radiant. A being of layered power, the armor she wore not just metal but condensed will and ancient enchantment. This sense will warn you of danger. Trust it. They moved on to physical training. Seraphine attacked him, gently she promised, though her casual strike still sent him stumbling backward. But when she struck again, something in Ethan responded before his conscious mind caught up. He moved faster than he should have been able to, not fast enough to avoid her completely but enough to deflect the blow rather than absorb it. Good. Seraphine encouraged. Your body is already adapting. The bond doesn't make you a vampire, but it makes you more than baseline human. Again. They sparred, if it could be called that, for the better part of an hour. Ethan fell, stumbled, and took dozens of gentle hits, but each time he responded a fraction faster, a fraction better. His body was learning at an accelerated rate, muscle memory forming in real time. It was exhilarating and exhausting in equal measure. Enough, Seraphine finally declared when Ethan was gasping on his floor, muscles screaming. You're adapting faster than expected. Good. You'll need every advantage. Ethan dragged himself to sitting, accepting the water bottle she offered. How long do we have? Before they come? Days at most. Perhaps less. Seraphine sat cross-legged across from him with impossible grace. We need to move. This location is compromised by definition. You triggered the stone at your workplace and this is your registered residence. We need somewhere defensible, somewhere off the grid. I don't have anywhere like that. I'm an archivist, not a survivalist. No, but I do. Her crimson eyes glinted. The Crimson Cathedral wasn't completely destroyed. Its lower levels exist still, far beneath the city, in the old tunnels your alliance built over and forgot. It's warded, protected, hidden for 3 centuries. We can shelter there while we plan our next move. And our next move is what exactly? Hide forever. Seraphine's expression became fierce. No. The stone's awakening is an omen. Other artifacts of power are beginning to stir. I can feel it in the bond. The balance the cleansing imposed is breaking down. We're going to find out why. We're going to gather allies. And we're going to ensure that when the old war reignites, we're not victims of it. She reached out, cupping his face with surprising gentleness. You didn't ask for this and I'm sorry for the burden. But the stone chose you and I have learned to trust its wisdom. You're stronger than you know, Ethan Cole. Together we might actually survive what's coming. Ethan met her gaze, Those impossible crimson eyes that had terrified him hours ago and now seemed like the only honest thing in a world built on lies and forgotten history. Together? He echoed. My wife the vampire war bride and me the archivist with magic I don't understand. What could possibly go wrong? Seraphine laughed, a sound rich and genuine. Everything. Absolutely everything. But it will be interesting, won't it? Despite everything, the fear, the exhaustion, the complete appending of his reality, Ethan found himself laughing too. Yeah. It really will be. They left at noon, which Seraphine insisted was safest despite conventional vampire mythology. Sunlight sensitivity is vastly exaggerated, she explained as she wrapped herself in a heavy hooded cloak that looked ancient but somehow hadn't been visible before. I won't burst into flames walking down your street. I'll be uncomfortable, weakened, but functional. Midday is when the enforcers least expect movement. Ethan had packed a bag with essentials. Clothes, his personal tablet, some emergency credits, the few things he couldn't bear to leave behind. Everything fit in a single backpack, which was either convenient or depressing depending on how he looked at it. Before they left, Seraphine spent 10 minutes moving through his apartment, her hands tracing patterns in the air that left glowing symbols in their wake. Wards, she explained. Not to keep people out but to mislead. Anyone tracking us will sense we were here but lose the trail at the threshold. It might buy us a few hours. The elevator ride down was surreal. Ethan in his casual street clothes and backpack, Seraphine in her full regalia hidden beneath a cloak that seemed to make people's eyes slide past her. The other residents who got on and off at various floors barely registered her presence, even in the enclosed space. Some form of supernatural camouflage, Ethan assumed, another ability he'd have to learn about. The lobby was busy with midday traffic, residents coming and going, delivery drones hovering at the package stations, security guards monitoring their screens with the bored attention of people who'd never encountered a real threat. Ethan felt hyper-aware of everything, his new shadow sense painting layers of information over the mundane scene. He could see the electronic surveillance as threads of blue light, the ambient magic of the city as a faint gray haze, and Seraphine as a dark star of crimson power at his side. They walked out into New Athens proper and Ethan saw his city with new eyes. New Athens was a marvel of post-cleansing architecture. Massive towers of steel and smart glass rising from a foundation of older construction, all of it contained within the famous walls that stretched 100 meters high. The Alliance had built it as a model city, a testament to humanity's triumph over the supernatural threats. 20 million people lived here, working in the corporate towers, shopping in the market districts, living in apartments stacked like cells in a hive. It was clean, safe, ordered, and it was laced with magic. Through his shadow sense, Ethan could see the truth Seraphine had hinted at. Wards on nearly every building, subtle but present, designed to repel or detect supernatural entities. Cameras that didn't just record but analyzed, looking for anomalous movement, unnatural heat signatures, the tells of non-human biology. Drones that floated through the streets weren't just monitoring traffic but tasting the air for magical residue. The Alliance knows, Ethan whispered as they walked, joining the flow of pedestrian traffic toward the transit stations. They know magic still exists. Of course they do, Seraphine replied quietly, her hood shadowing her face. The cleansing wasn't about eradicating magic. That's impossible. It was about controlling the narrative, controlling the power. They drove us out and declared victory, then built their cities as cages that look like paradises. Every ward, every censor, every law about restricted zones, it's all about maintaining their monopoly on what they call paranormal assets. They descended into the transit system, boarding a mag train heading toward the Old Quarter, the section of New Athens built over the original pre-cleansing city. As the train accelerated through its tunnel, Ethan studied the other passengers. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the hidden world layered over theirs. He'd been one of them yesterday. Ignorance had been comfortable. No going back, Seraphine murmured, apparently reading his expression. Once you see the cage, you can't forget it's there. The Old Quarter was different from the gleaming corporate sectors. Here, buildings were older, shorter, built from stone and concrete rather than smart materials. The streets were narrower, more organic, following patterns laid down centuries before the Alliance existed. It was considered historic, quaint, a tourist attraction. It was also, Ethan was beginning to realize, less surveilled. Seraphine led him through a maze of side streets and alleys, moving with the confidence of someone who knew this territory intimately. They were descending, Ethan realized, each turn taking them slightly lower, toward the city's foundations. Finally, she stopped before what looked like a maintenance access door set into a wall covered in aged graffiti. "Here," she said, producing a key that looked like it was made from black glass or obsidian. She pressed it against the lock and Ethan's shadow sense flared. He could see the magic activating, ancient wards recognizing the key and disengaging. The door opened soundlessly despite its apparent rust. Beyond was darkness and a staircase leading down. "Stay close," Seraphine instructed, her voice taking on a different quality, harder, more commanding. This was the war bride speaking, the warrior preparing for potential combat. "The upper levels are safe, but we'll pass through sections where other things have made nests. Most won't challenge me, but your presence may provoke curiosity." "Other things?" Ethan repeated. "You mean there are more than just vampires?" "Oh, much more. The cleansing drove out or destroyed the major supernatural species, but life finds a way. Things adapted, evolved, hit. The deep places beneath cities are rarely as empty as authorities believe." They descended. The staircase was ancient, worn stone that predated modern construction. Ethan's shadow sense illuminated the path with faint light even as his normal vision struggled in the darkness. Seraphine moved ahead of him, no longer bothering to hide her nature. Her eyes glowed openly, crimson lanterns in the black, and her armor seemed to drink in the shadows rather than be obscured by them. They passed through what must have been old utility tunnels, then sections that looked like forgotten basements, then passages cut from raw earth and stone. The air grew cooler, damper, heavy with the weight of the city above. Ethan could hear water dripping somewhere and other sounds, scuttling, distant echoes, things he told himself were rats but suspected weren't. At one point, Seraphine raised a hand, stopping him. In the darkness ahead, Ethan saw eyes, multiple pairs, reflective and inhuman, watching from a side passage. Seraphine said something in a language Ethan didn't recognize, harsh and ancient. The eyes blinked and withdrew. "What were those?" he asked when they moved on. "Ghouls. Degenerate things that feed on refuse and the occasional foolish urban explorer. They're tolerated because they clean up evidence of other activities down here. I told them we're passing through and not prey. They understood you? Enough. Even debased creatures remember the old tongues when spoken by one who was old when they were born." Down they went, deeper into the foundation of New Athens, into the bones of the older city beneath, into layers of history that the Alliance had paved over and forgotten. Ethan's legs burned with the constant descent, but he pushed on, trusting Seraphine's lead. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 40 minutes, they emerged into a space that stole Ethan's breath. It was a cathedral, or had been. A vast underground chamber with arched ceilings that rose into shadow, massive stone pillars carved with intricate designs, stained glass windows that must have once been beautiful but now were dark, their light sources long extinguished. The floor was black marble, cracked in places but still magnificent. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, were the symbols, the same runes and glyphs that adorned Seraphine's armor, glowing faintly with internal light, painting the chamber in crimson and gold. "The Crimson Cathedral," Seraphine said softly, reverence in her voice. "Last sanctuary of my covenant. They burned the upper levels but they never found these depths. The wards held. 3 centuries and they held." Ethan moved forward in wonder, his shadow sense showing him the layers of magic woven into every surface. This place was a fortress, a battery, a work of art all combined. "It's incredible. It's home. Or was. Or will be again." Seraphine walked to the center of the chamber where a raised dais stood. Upon it rested a stone altar, and set into that altar was a familiar black stone covered in runes. The Covenant Stone. Or rather, its anchor point. What you found in the archive was a piece of this, deliberately broken off and taken during the cleansing. Now that both pieces exist in the same reality again, they'll want to reunite. She was right. Ethan could feel it, a pull, a resonance in his chest that called toward the altar. The stone recognized him, sang to him in a frequency that bypassed his ears and spoke directly to his blood. What happens if they reunite? He asked. The covenant stone becomes whole again. Its full power returns. And the wards on this cathedral, which have been running on reserves for 300 years, will flood with energy again. This place will become truly unassailable, a beacon for the scattered remnants of my kind. Seraphine's expression was complex. Hope and fear mingled. It will also announce to everyone with the sense to perceive it that the Crimson Eclipse Covenant is reborn. We'll become targets for every faction that wants us dead or controlled. So we're trapped. We need the stone's power to survive, but using it brings everyone down on us. Yes. Seraphine turned to him. Which is why we need more than just defense. We need allies. Intelligence. Power. The archive where you work, it's not just a museum of dead artifacts. It's a repository of everything the Alliance confiscated during the cleansing. Weapons, relics, knowledge. If we're to have any chance, we need access to those resources. Ethan's mind began working through the problem, slipping into the analytical mode that had served him well in his studies. The archive is secure. Biometric locks, armed guards, AI surveillance. And after the stone fragment goes missing from my workstation, they'll know I'm involved. Going back is suicide. Going back openly, yes. But you know the layout. You know the security procedures. And you have something most thieves don't, a legitimate reason to have been there, credentials that might not be revoked immediately. Seraphine moved closer, her intensity focused on him like a laser. We don't need to rob the entire archive. We need specific items. Intelligence about Alliance Enforcer operations. Artifacts that might counter their technology. Information about other supernatural survivors. These things exist in your archive, buried in restricted sections. We extract what we need and we disappear before they realize it's gone. It was risky. It was probably insane. But Ethan could see the logic. They needed resources and he'd spent 2 years learning every corner of the Prometheus archive. He knew the schedules, the blind spots, the sections where security was more theater than substance. I'll need time to plan, he said. And you'll need to stay hidden. The archive's wards are military grade. If you enter, they'll detect you immediately. Then you go alone. I'll prepare here, restore what I can of the cathedral's defenses. We'll use the bond to stay in contact. She pressed her hand to his chest again, over his heart. You can feel me through it, yes? Focus on that connection and you'll be able to sense danger, call for help if needed. It's limited at range, but within the city, it will function. Ethan nodded slowly, feeling the truth of her words. He could sense her, a presence in the back of his mind, warm and strong and undeniably there. How long do we have before the archive realizes the stone fragment is gone? They may already know. Your best window is the next 48 hours. Before they've fully locked down and begun serious investigation. We move fast, strike decisively, and retreat to ground before they can organize a response. So no pressure. Seraphine smiled, and this time it was warm, almost affectionate. You're handling this remarkably well. Most humans would be catatonic by now. I'm compartmentalizing and possibly going into shock, Ethan admitted. But I'll process it later. Right now we survive. We adapt. We fight back. He met her crimson gaze. You said the bond shows compatibility of spirit. I'm starting to understand what that means. You're not a victim. You didn't survive 3 centuries by hiding and hoping. You're a warrior and you need a partner who won't break. And are you that partner? The question was genuine, not a challenge. I don't know yet, Ethan said honestly. But I'm going to find out. Because you're right. There's no going back. My old life is gone. So either I collapse or I become something strong enough to survive in this new one. And I've never been very good at giving up. The fierce pride in Seraphine's expression made Ethan's heart race. Then prove it, husband. Go into the lion's den. Steal from those who would kill us. Return to me with the weapons we need to fight back. She pulled him close and for a moment they simply stood together, the bond between them humming with shared resolve. And then we begin the real work of surviving the storm. Ethan returned to the surface alone, emerging from the hidden entrance into the evening bustle of the old quarter. The transition from the ancient depths to the modern city was jarring. Noise, light, the smell of street food and vehicle exhaust, the hum of technology that never truly slept. He forced himself to walk casually, just another citizen heading home from a day of work, even as his mind raced through planning. The Prometheus Archive was located in the Research District, a 20-minute transit ride from his position. According to the bond thrumming in his chest, Seraphine was alive and active far below, working on something he could feel but not quite perceive, magic probably restoring the cathedral's defenses. The connection was strange but comforting. He wasn't alone even when alone. His tablet chimed with messages as he boarded the transit. Automated queries from work wondering about his absence, a wellness check from HR, a more pointed inquiry from his supervisor. Nothing from security yet, which meant either they hadn't connected him to the missing stone fragment or they were watching him to see what he'd do. Ethan drafted a reply explaining he'd been feeling ill, plausible given he'd worked double shifts the past week. He'd be in tomorrow, he lied, just needed rest. The response bought him time. Maybe 12 hours before they escalated. He didn't go to the archive that night. Instead, he went to a public cafe in the research district, one with a view of the archive's exterior, and studied the building while pretending to work on his tablet. The Prometheus Archive occupied a fortress-like structure of black steel and reinforced concrete, windowless except for the decorative facade on the main entrance. 12 stories above ground, 6 below, officially. The stone fragment had come from sublevel 9, which meant there were at least 3 levels below the official basement that weren't on public schematics. Security visible from the street, armed guards at entrances, drone patrols on the roof, vehicle checkpoints at the loading docks. Security not visible but known to exist. Pressure sensors on all floors, motion detectors in every corridor, AI analyzing every access card swipe for anomalous patterns and wards. He could see them now with his shadow sense, glowing lines of defensive magic woven through the building's structure. This was going to be difficult. Ethan spent 3 hours in that cafe drinking synthetic coffee and mapping what he knew. His credentials would get him through the main entrance and most checkpoints. His biometrics were in the system as authorized personnel. But the sublevels, especially the restricted sections, required special clearance he didn't have. And if they were looking for him, walking in the front door was suicide. Unless an idea formed. Risky but possible. The archive ran on bureaucratic procedures, and bureaucracies had exploitable gaps. He'd been working there for 2 years, exemplary record, trusted employee. If he could fabricate a legitimate-seeming reason to access restricted materials before security tightened the net. Ethan pulled up the archive's internal work order system on his tablet. His credentials still worked. They hadn't locked him out yet, probably waiting to see if he'd do something suspicious. He drafted a research request. Emergency cataloging update required for items on sublevel 6, where the overflow storage from the recent sublevel 9 excavation was temporarily housed. Tag it as time-sensitive due to preservation concerns. Route it through channels that would take a few hours to verify but would generate the access clearance automatically. He submitted the request, backdated slightly to make it look like he'd filed it before leaving sick. Then he waited, nursing his coffee, watching the sky darken over New Athens. The bond pulsed with query, Seraphine checking on him. He focused on projecting calm confidence through the connection, felt her answering acknowledgement. No words, just emotion and intent. The intimacy of it was still strange but growing less so. Midnight. The night shift would be minimal staffing, security and a handful of researchers who preferred working in quiet. Ethan's tablet chimed. Access request approved, valid for 6 hours starting at 2 a.m. Perfect. The system had processed his request as routine, generating temporary credentials for sublevel 6. He left the cafe and walked the perimeter of the archive until he found what he was looking for. A service entrance used by maintenance crews, less heavily monitored than the main gates. His shadow sense showed him the wards here were thinner, designed more to alert than prevent. At 1:45 a.m. he approached. The guard at this gate was different from the professional soldiers at the main entrance. Private security, someone doing a boring job for mediocre pay. Ethan presented his credentials and the work order on his tablet. "Little late for catalog work," the guard commented, but not suspiciously, just making conversation during a dull shift. "Preservation emergency," Ethan replied, letting real exhaustion show. "Items from the new excavation are showing signs of degradation. Need to move them to better storage before they deteriorate further." The guard scanned his credentials, checked the work order, shrugged. "Science stuff. Above my pay grade. You're cleared for sub-6. For the next 6 hours, yeah. Go ahead. Sign in here." He passed over a tablet for the log. Ethan signed, walked through the checkpoint, and entered the Prometheus archive for what he knew might be the last time. The corridors were empty at this hour, lit by dim emergency lighting. His footsteps echoed on polished floors as he made his way to the elevator banks. Sublevel 6 access required a specific elevator. Only 2 in the building went that deep, and both had enhanced security. He swiped his temporary credentials. The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside, selected his destination, and descended. The ride felt eternal. Through the bond, he could feel Seraphine's attention focus on him. She knew he was in danger now, in the heart of enemy territory. He sent reassurance back, hoped it was convincing. Sublevel 6 was cold, the air recycled and stale. The elevator opened onto a corridor lined with vault doors, each leading to specialized storage chambers. His temporary credentials got him past the first checkpoint, and then he was in the overflow storage area, shelves and crates containing items waiting for permanent cataloging, the detritus of a century of Alliance confiscation. Ethan began searching, using his shadow sense to guide him. He wasn't just looking randomly, he'd studied the intake logs obsessively during his employment, knew what had been brought in recently. Items from vampire territories destroyed in the cleansing. Weapons that had been tagged as anomalous technology. Documents from old Covenant libraries. He found the documents first, a crate of sealed folders marked with hazard warnings. The Alliance apparently considered information dangerous enough to require containment. Ethan photographed pages rapidly with his tablet, prioritizing anything related to enforcer operations, survivor sightings, or artifact capabilities. The bond gave him a sense of what Seraphine would find valuable. Certain symbols made the connection pulse with urgency. Next, weapons. He found a case containing what looked like ceremonial daggers, but his shadow sense showed them blazing with contained power. These weren't replicas, they were genuine vampire artifacts, waiting to be studied or destroyed. He took 2, small enough to conceal in his bag. Then he found something unexpected. A containment unit holding what appeared to be blood samples, each vial labeled with dates and locations. Recent dates. Current locations. These weren't historical artifacts. These were active investigations. The Alliance was tracking vampires right now and keeping their findings here. Ethan photographed every label, his heart pounding. This was intelligence worth more than weapons. If Seraphine could analyze this data, they'd know where Alliance attention was focused, where other vampires were hiding or operating. He was so focused on the vials that he almost missed the alarm. Almost. His shadow sense flared a warning a half-second before the lights shifted from dim white to red. Somewhere, a proximity detector he'd triggered or a scheduled security sweep had found him where he wasn't supposed to be. Ethan grabbed his bag and ran. The corridor erupted with sound, alarms blaring, security doors beginning to seal. Ethan sprinted toward the elevator, credentials in hand, praying his temporary access would hold long enough. Behind him he heard boots, guards responding, fast and professional. The elevator. 20 meters. 15. The doors were starting to close on lockdown protocol. 10 meters. Ethan pushed his enhanced speed, the gift of the bond, and dove through the narrowing gap just as the doors sealed shut. Stop. Security. Hands where we can see them. The shout came from behind the now closed doors, muffled but urgent. Ethan jammed his credentials against the panel, selecting ground floor, any floor that wasn't here. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. His access was being verified, security protocols weighing whether to honor it or trap him. The elevator lurched upward. Temporary credentials still valid, barely, and the lockdown hadn't fully propagated through the system yet. Ethan sagged against the wall, gasping, feeling Seraphine's alarm through the bond like a spike of cold fire. He wasn't safe yet. Not close. The elevator would be met at whatever floor it stopped. But he had seconds to think, to plan. His shadow sense showed him the elevator's mechanical systems, the emergency access hatch in the ceiling, and, there, the maintenance shafts running parallel to the elevator banks. Ethan climbed onto the elevator railing, pushed aside the ceiling hatch, and hauled himself up just as the elevator reached sublevel 3 and stopped. He heard the doors open below, heard guards entering, heard their confusion at finding it empty. He was in the maintenance shaft now, a narrow vertical corridor of cables and structural supports, dark except for his shadow sense illumination. Above him, the shaft rose toward ground level and freedom. Below, guards were figuring out what he'd done. Plumb. Ethan climbed, hand over hand, using maintenance rungs built into the shaft walls. His enhanced strength and endurance made it possible, but barely. His arms screamed. His lungs burned. Below, searchlights pierced into the shaft. They were coming after him. Ground level. The shaft had an access door here, locked from the inside but not sealed yet. Ethan kicked it open with strength he didn't know he possessed, fell through into a maintenance room, scrambled to his feet and kept running. The archive's ground floor was chaos. Alarms, security mobilizing, automated systems sealing exits. But Ethan knew this building, every corner of it. There was a freight access that ran to the loading docks, used for moving large artifacts. Security there was light because it only opened onto a fenced area, not directly to the streets. He found it, forced the door with emergency override, and emerged into the loading area. Fenced but not impossibly so, the barrier was designed to keep vehicles in, not to stop a desperate human with supernatural augmentation. Ethan climbed, dropped to the other side and ran into the night streets of New Athens. Sirens behind him. Pursuit. But the city was large and the darkness was his ally now. Ethan ran, following instincts he didn't fully understand, the bond pulling him toward safety, toward Seraphine, toward the cathedral. He ran until his lungs threatened to burst, until the sirens faded, until he reached the old quarter and found the hidden entrance. Down into the depths he went, no longer tired, adrenaline and the bond's power pushing him onward. Past the ghouls who scattered at his frantic passage. Past the forgotten tunnels. Down and down until the cathedral's glow appeared ahead. Seraphine was waiting at the entrance, her expression fierce with concern and pride. Ethan collapsed into her arms and for a moment, they just held each other, the bond singing with relief and triumph. "I got it," he gasped. "Documents. Weapons. Intelligence on their operations. I got everything we need." "And they know," Seraphine said, not a question. "You're marked now. No going back to your old life, not even the pretense of it." "I know." Ethan pulled back to look at her. "But I did it. I went into their stronghold and came out with their secrets. That's not the action of a victim." Seraphine's smile was radiant. "No. That's the action of a survivor. My partner. My husband." She kissed his forehead, a gesture surprisingly tender from a war bride. "Come. Rest. And then we'll see what you've brought us. The real war is just beginning, but tonight we celebrate a victory." The following hours were a blur of exhaustion and exhilaration. Seraphine guided Ethan deeper into the cathedral, to chambers he hadn't seen before, living quarters preserved from 3 centuries ago, surprisingly intact. There was a bed, ancient but serviceable, where Ethan finally collapsed while Seraphine examined his stolen intelligence. He woke to find her sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by his photographs projected as holograms from his tablet, her crimson eyes scanning rapidly through the information. Dawn light, or what passed for it this deep underground, filtered through cracks in the ceiling, painting the chamber in shades of gray and amber. "This is extraordinary," she said without looking at him. "You found documentation of Alliance Black operations going back 50 years. They've been hunting us systematically, small groups, isolated survivors. But look here, she gestured, and a map materialized in the projection. These locations. These are where they've found traces of supernatural activity. Some are my kind. But others, her expression darkened. Others are things that should not exist. Things the cleansing was supposed to have eliminated but clearly didn't. Ethan sat up, accepting the water and food she'd somehow procured. He didn't ask from where. What kind of things? Demons. Ancient spirits. Entities from the spaces between realities. The cleansing targeted vampires, werewolves, fae, the visible, organized supernatural species. But there are older things, deeper things that the Alliance either couldn't destroy or didn't know existed. And according to this data, they're becoming active again. She looked at him finally. The balance is breaking down, Ethan. Not just between humans and vampires, but between this reality and others. Something is weakening the barriers, and it started approximately 20 years ago. What happened 20 years ago? That's what we need to discover. But look at this, another projection, this one showing a complex diagram. This is the Alliance's analysis of magical field theory. They understand far more than they admit publicly. They've been studying the supernatural scientifically, treating magic as just another force to measure and weaponize. And they've had success. These weapon specifications, she pulled up schematics that hurt to look at, designs that somehow offended Ethan's new magical senses. They're designed to disrupt supernatural biology at the molecular level. These would kill me in seconds. Then we know what we're up against. Ethan moved to sit beside her, studying the projections. His archive training helped him parse the technical language. But we also know where they're vulnerable. Look at the blood sample data. They're tracking supernatural entities, but their coverage has gaps. Entire sections of the city they're not monitoring closely. The suburban zones, the manufacturing sectors, the water management tunnels. Because those areas are poor, populated by citizens the Alliance doesn't value as highly. Of course. Seraphine's disgust was evident. They protect the corporate towers and wealthy enclaves while letting the margins fend for themselves. Which means if there are other survivors, they're probably in those gaps. Hiding where surveillance is weakest. Ethan felt his analytical mind engaging fully, the same process he used for archival research now applied to guerrilla intelligence. We can use this. Reach out to others like you, build a network in the blind spots. It's risky. Not all survivors will be friendly. 3 centuries of hiding has made my kind fractious. Some have adapted by becoming exactly the monsters the Alliance claims we were. Others have gone mad from isolation. And some may see you as an abomination, a human tainted with vampire bond, breaking ancient taboos. But some might see us as hope, Ethan countered. A covenant stone reawakened. A war bride openly operating. The old powers returning. That has to mean something to those who've been waiting for it. Seraphine studied him, her expression unreadable. Then she reached out, taking his hand. You're thinking strategically. Like a war planner. Like someone who intends to fight rather than flee. You said I could be a victim or a survivor, Ethan replied. I choose survivor. But more than that, I choose to fight back. The Alliance has built their power on lies and hidden atrocities. They've hunted your people to near extinction while pretending the supernatural doesn't exist. They've created a world where millions live in ignorance while they hoard knowledge and power. He gestured to the projections. This is wrong. Fundamentally wrong. And maybe I'm just one human who stumbled into this, but I'm also an archivist. I know the power of information, of truth. If we can expose what they've done, what they're hiding. Revolution. Seraphine's smile was fierce. You're talking about revolution. Exposing the Alliance's lies. Breaking their monopoly on supernatural knowledge. Freeing not just my kind but humanity from enforced ignorance. Is that insane? Completely. She laughed, the sound echoing in the ancient chamber. It's also exactly the kind of thinking that made the Crimson Eclipse Covenant believe partnership with humanity was possible. We weren't content to rule over humans or hide from them. We wanted to build something better, together. And that's what got us destroyed. Her expression softened. But perhaps the dream was simply ahead of its time. Perhaps now, with the balance breaking and old powers returning, the world is finally ready. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what they were considering settling over them. Revolution against the most powerful organization on the planet, with resources that amounted to stolen documents and each other. It should have felt hopeless. Instead, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in years: purpose. So we build a network, he said, making it concrete, actionable. We reach out to supernatural survivors in the surveillance blind spots. We gather intelligence, resources, allies. We find out what's causing the balance to break down. And we position ourselves to exploit whatever's coming when it arrives. And we reunite the Covenant Stone, Seraphine added. Bring the fragment from the archive to its altar. Restore the cathedral to full power. That will serve as our base, our fortress, our symbol. She squeezed his hand. It will also paint an enormous target on us. Every faction will know where we are. Then we'd better be ready for them. Ethan squeezed back. Starting with those weapons you identified. If we know what the Alliance uses against your kind, we can develop counters. And the artifacts I stole, what are they? Seraphine pulled the ceremonial daggers from his bag, examining them with reverence. These are Covenant blades. Forged from starlight and vampire essence, enchanted to kill anything supernatural, including rogue vampires. They were used by war brides to execute judgment and maintain order. In proper hands they can cut through magical defenses, disrupt spells, even harm entities that are otherwise invulnerable. She offered one to him. This is yours now. Bound to you through the bride bond. It will respond to your will, protect you when I cannot. Ethan took the blade, and the moment his hand closed around the hilt, he felt it. The weapon recognized him, accepted him, became an extension of his arm. His shadow sense showed him the blade's true nature. Condensed power shaped into physical form, hungry for purpose. I don't know how to fight with a knife. Then I'll teach you. We'll teach each other. I'll train you in combat, you'll train me in modern technology and tactics. Partnership, remember? We each bring our strengths. She took up the second blade, moving into a ready stance that was pure deadly grace. Lesson 1. A Covenant blade isn't just a weapon. It's a focus for will. When you strike with intent, with purpose, with the full force of your determination. Show me. The next hours were brutal and enlightening. Seraphine was a patient but demanding teacher, drilling Ethan in basic forms, correcting his stance, pushing him to connect the blade's power to his own will. He failed more than he succeeded, but each failure taught him something, and the bond helped. He could feel her knowledge flowing to him, not as words but as muscle memory, as instinct. By the time they stopped, Ethan was drenched in sweat but no longer completely incompetent. He wouldn't win any fights against trained opponents, but he could defend himself, could channel his determination through the blade to devastating effect. It was a start. Good, Seraphine declared, not even winded despite matching his every movement. You learn quickly. The bond helps, but you have natural talent, your precision, your analytical mind. It translates to combat better than you'd think. Give it time and you'll be formidable. Give it time, Ethan repeated, laughing tiredly. That's the one resource we don't have. The Alliance knows I'm involved now. They'll be hunting me. Let them hunt. Seraphine's eyes blazed. They'll find more than they bargained for. Because we're not running, we're not hiding, and we're not playing by their rules anymore. She pulled him close, and Ethan felt the bond surge between them. Not romantic exactly, though there was heat there, but something deeper. Commitment. Partnership. War-forged unity. We're going to burn their lies down, expose their crimes, and rebuild a world where humans and supernatural beings can coexist openly. Or we're going to die trying. Either way, we face it together. Ethan kissed her then, impulsively, and was surprised when she kissed back. Fierce and hungry, 3 centuries of isolation and struggle channeled into one moment of connection. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Seraphine's smile was radiant. Well, she said. That's new. War brides typically maintain professional distance from our partners. Typically, Ethan agreed. But nothing about this is typical. And I'm discovering I'm not very good at professional distance. No, she agreed, her voice warm. Neither am I, apparently. 300 years alone, and then the stone sends me you, a stubborn archivist who breaks into fortresses and plans revolutions and kisses like he's challenging death itself. She traced his face with her cool fingers. Perhaps the stone knew exactly what it was doing. Perhaps it sent me not just a partner for survival but for living. They spent the rest of the day planning, resting, preparing. Seraphine worked on restoring more of the cathedral's wards, teaching Ethan the basics of magical theory as she did. Think of it as programming reality, she explained. You write instructions in the language of symbols and will, and if your intent is clear enough, reality compiles the code and executes it. Vampires are natural programmers. We have the power reserve and the lifespan to master complex spells. But humans with latent talent can learn, especially when bond-enhanced. Ethan proved a surprisingly quick study, managing to create a simple ward that would alert them to intruders. It was clumsy and inefficient compared to Seraphine's work, but it functioned. Another tool in their arsenal. As night fell, actual night, which they sensed rather than saw this deep underground, Seraphine announced it was time for the next step. The Covenant Stone fragment. We need to retrieve it from wherever the archive secured it after your theft was discovered. Once we reunite the pieces, the cathedral reaches full power, and we'll have a true sanctuary. The archive will have increased security massively, Ethan pointed out. Going back is suicide. Going back through the front is suicide, Seraphine corrected. But there are other ways. The archive was built over old city foundations just like everything else in New Athens. And I know those old foundations intimately. There are passages, forgotten routes, ways to bypass modern security entirely. Her smile was predatory. This time we go together. You navigate the modern security, I handle the ancient paths. And we remind the Alliance that they're not the only ones who can wage war in the shadows. The assault on the archive happened at midnight, and it was nothing like Ethan's panicked theft the previous night. This was coordinated, planned, executed with the precision of Seraphine's military training and Ethan's insider knowledge. They approached from the suburban tunnels, passages that predated New Athens by centuries, built when the area was just another pre-cleansing city with a different name. Seraphine moved through the darkness with absolute confidence, her vampiric senses and ancient memory guiding them through routes that no modern map showed. Here, she whispered, stopping before a wall of old brick. To Ethan's normal vision it was solid. But his shadow sense showed him the truth, a doorway warded and hidden but present. This passage connects to the archive's foundation. It was a smuggler's route in the old days. The Alliance built over it without realizing it existed. She pressed her hand to the wall, speaking words in that ancient language, and the wards disengaged. The bricks shimmered and became passable, a selective intangibility that made Ethan's head hurt to perceive. They stepped through into a space that was part pre-cleansing construction, part modern foundation. Architecture from two eras meeting awkwardly. Above them, Ethan could sense the archive's presence, its weight, its security systems humming with electronic vigilance. But here, in the forgotten spaces between floors, they were invisible. Seraphine led him through the gaps, moving vertically through maintenance shafts and horizontal through utility corridors, always staying in the blind spots. The stone fragment will be in maximum security now, Ethan murmured as they climbed. Sublevel 9, probably in a containment vault. Biometric locks, guards, the works. Which is why we're not using doors. Seraphine stopped at what appeared to be a solid concrete wall. This is directly adjacent to Sublevel 9's vault section. I can feel the stone's presence through this barrier, can you? Ethan focused, and yes, there it was, a pull in his chest, the bond resonating with the stone fragment somewhere beyond the wall. I feel it. Good. Then watch and learn. Seraphine drew her covenant blade and placed it against the concrete. She spoke a single word, and the blade began to glow, cutting through the barrier not with heat but with controlled disintegration, the magic unmaking the molecular bonds holding the concrete together. It was silent, surgical, impossibly efficient. A hole formed just large enough to pass through. Beyond was darkness and the hum of climate control systems. They were inside the vault section, having bypassed every security measure by simply going around them all. The stone fragment rested in a containment unit, transparent crystal, heavily warded, locked with both electronic and magical security. Alarms would trigger the moment it was touched. Except Seraphine wasn't touching it. She was cutting the container free from its moorings entirely, the Covenant blade slicing through connections with the same surgical precision it had shown on the concrete. "When I take this, we'll have seconds before the entire building mobilizes," she said calmly. "Stay close to me. Trust the bond. And run faster than you've ever run." She lifted the container. Alarms shrieked instantly, deafening and urgent. Security doors began slamming shut throughout the building. But Seraphine was already moving, carrying the container with one hand and pulling Ethan with the other, her supernatural speed forcing him to run at the edge of his enhanced capabilities. Back through the hole. Into the maintenance spaces. But this time, guards were responding, flooding into the areas they'd passed through moments before. Ethan heard shouting, saw flashlights piercing the darkness behind them. "Faster!" Seraphine commanded, and Ethan pushed harder, his lungs burning but his legs finding reserves he didn't know existed. The bond fed him her strength, her urgency, her absolute determination to escape. They burst into the old tunnels, Seraphine sealing the passage behind them with a word that made the ancient wards flare to life, buying them precious seconds. Then they were running through the pre-cleansing corridors, the stolen container bouncing against Seraphine's side, alarms still screaming in the distance. But the distance was growing. The archive's security couldn't follow into spaces they didn't know existed. Seraphine's knowledge of the old city, combined with Ethan's modern navigation sense, gave them an advantage no amount of technology could counter. They ran, and the sounds of pursuit faded, and finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, they reached the cathedral's entrance. Safe. They were safe. Seraphine set down the container, breathing hard despite her supernatural endurance. Ethan collapsed against a pillar, gasping, his entire body screaming in protest. But they'd done it. They'd stolen from the Alliance twice and survived. That, Ethan managed, was insane. That, Seraphine corrected with a fierce grin, was warfare. Calculated risk, overwhelming speed, perfect extraction. This is what I was made for, Ethan. What war brides do. And you kept pace with me. You ran through hell without hesitation. I'm impressed. I'm terrified, Ethan admitted, but also alive. More alive than I've been in years. Good. Because now comes the truly dangerous part. Seraphine lifted the container, carrying it toward the altar at the cathedral's heart. We reunite the stone. And we announce to every power in this city that we're here, we're strong, and we're not hiding anymore. They placed the container on the altar, next to the stone fragment already embedded there. Seraphine drew her covenant blade and carefully cut through the crystal housing, freeing the stolen fragment. The moment it was exposed, both pieces began to glow, crimson light pulsing in synchronization with Ethan's heartbeat. Together, Seraphine said, offering her hand. We do this together. Ethan took her hand, and together they lifted the fragment, pressing it against the altar stone. The pieces touched and reality shuddered. The response came faster than even Seraphine had predicted. Within 6 hours of the Covenant Stone's reunification, they received their first visitor. Though visitor was perhaps too gentle a word for something that materialized out of shadow in the cathedral's depths without triggering any of their wards. Ethan sensed it first through the bond, a presence that made his new magical senses scream wrongness. He and Seraphine were in what had become their planning chamber, analyzing the stolen intelligence, when the air in the corner simply darkened and congealed into a figure. Seraphine was on her feet instantly, covenant blade in hand, placing herself between Ethan and the intruder. Show yourself properly or leave the same way you came. The shadow laughed, a sound like grinding stone. Then it resolved into something more distinct. A man, or man-shaped at least, dressed in Alliance military uniform but with modifications that glowed with integrated magical circuitry. His eyes were wrong, too many facets like insect eyes made to look human. When he smiled, his teeth were metallic. Enforcer, Seraphine identified, her voice hard. Modified. Augmented. Part machine, part magic, part human. The Alliance's answer to beings like me. Seraphine Blackthorn, the Enforcer said, his voice oddly modulated, processed through something that wasn't quite a throat. Last war bride of the Crimson Eclipse Covenant. Confirmed dead in the cleansing 300 years ago. This is an anomaly that requires correction. Correction, Seraphine repeated flatly. Is that what you're calling murder now? Murder applies to living beings with legal standing. You are classified as a non-entity. Your existence violates accords signed in blood and fire. The Enforcer's gaze shifted to Ethan. And Ethan Cole, formerly of the Prometheus Archive, now marked with bride bond contamination. Also scheduled for correction, though as a human citizen, you're entitled to a hearing before termination. Do you wish to claim this right? I wish, Ethan said, surprised by how steady his voice was, for you to leave our sanctuary before we demonstrate exactly why attacking a war bride in her own cathedral is a poor tactical decision. The Enforcer's head tilted in a gesture that was mechanical rather than organic. Interesting. You speak as if you believe you have agency in this situation. Analysis suggests otherwise. This location is surrounded. Alliance forces are converging. Enforcer Division has deployed 12 augmented units. Surrender is advised. Declined, Seraphine said simply. Then she moved. Ethan's enhanced senses barely tracked it. One moment she was standing still, the next she was across the chamber, her covenant blade cutting toward the Enforcer's neck with speed that blurred reality. The Enforcer blocked, producing a weapon from nowhere, a blade of his own that glowed with harsh blue light, technology and magic married in Alliance fashion. They clashed, and the sound was like a thunderclap. Magical energy discharged, making the air crackle. The Enforcer was fast, inhumanly so, his augmented body moving with mechanical precision. But Seraphine was faster, and more importantly, she was fighting on ground soaked in 3 centuries of Covenant power, now fully restored. Still, it was clear this wasn't a fight she could win quickly. The Enforcer matched her blow for blow, his augmentations giving him strength that rivaled her supernatural abilities. And if he was telling the truth about backup? Ethan's mind raced. They couldn't fight the entire Alliance. But maybe they didn't have to. He focused on his shadow sense, looking beyond the immediate chamber, mapping the cathedral's extent, feeling the wards that Seraphine had restored. They weren't just defensive, they were reactive, capable of responding to intent. He reached out to them with his will, clumsy and uncertain but determined. The cathedral was a fortress. It would defend itself if he could just figure out how to ask it properly. The wards responded to his intent with surprising eagerness, as if they'd been waiting for someone to direct them. Ethan felt knowledge flow through the bond from Seraphine. Battle memories, command protocols, the authority structure of a covenant. He was bond partner to a war bride, which meant the cathedral recognized him as legitimate command authority. Seraphine, he called out. I can trigger the cathedral's active defenses. She disengaged from the Enforcer with a flip that should have been impossible in full armor, landing beside Ethan. Do it. Full defensive lockdown. Ethan spoke words he didn't know he knew, commands in that ancient language flowing through him via the bond. The cathedral responded instantly. The entire structure began to glow with power, wards activating in sequence, layer upon layer of magical defense flooding to active status. And more than that, the passages leading to the cathedral, all those forgotten tunnels and old routes, they began to seal themselves, not physically but magically, becoming impassable to anyone without proper authority. The Enforcer tried to move, to attack or escape, but the cathedral's power focused on him specifically. Symbols flared to life beneath his feet, and suddenly he couldn't move, held in place by wards designed to contain supernatural entities. Impossible, he said, strain entering his modulated voice. These defenses were assessed as depleted. Our intelligence indicated. Your intelligence, Ethan interrupted, feeling power and confidence surge through him in equal measure, failed to account for the Covenant stone being reunited. This cathedral is at full strength for the first time in 300 years. And you're standing at its heart, threatening its war bride and her bond partner. Did you really think that would end well? Light exploded from the altar, crimson and gold in colors Ethan had no names for, flooding the cathedral with radiance that hadn't filled this space in 3 centuries. The symbols carved into every surface blazed to life, the wards activating at full power, the magic that had been dying roaring back to overwhelming strength. Ethan felt power surge through the bond, through himself, through Seraphine, the covenant stone recognizing them, binding them, crowning them as inheritors of everything the Crimson Eclipse covenant had been. Images flashed through Ethan's mind, memories not his own. Seraphine's memories. The cathedral as it had been before the cleansing, filled with vampires and their human partners, a community built on mutual respect and shared purpose. The war, brutal and desperate, as Alliance forces hunted them with systematic efficiency. The last stand, where Seraphine and her sisters fought until only she remained, bleeding and defiant. The centuries of hiding, watching, waiting. And now rebirth. The light faded, but its effects remained. The cathedral was restored, not physically but magically, a fortress of power that even the Alliance's best weapons would struggle to breach. And more than that, Ethan could feel it. The stone's activation had sent out a pulse, a signal that every supernatural entity within 100 miles would sense. They'd announced themselves to the world. "It's done," Seraphine breathed, her eyes glowing brighter than Ethan had ever seen. "The Crimson Eclipse covenant lives again. And the war for New Athens' soul has truly begun." The enforcer struggled against the binding, his augmentation surging with power. For a moment, Ethan thought he might break free. Whatever the Alliance had done to this person was formidable. But the cathedral had endured the cleansing, had held its wards intact through centuries of dormancy. One enforcer, no matter how enhanced, wasn't enough. "Seraphine," Ethan said quietly, "what do we do with him?" The war bride's expression was cold. "In my time, an enemy who invaded sacred ground was executed without mercy. But," she glanced at Ethan and her expression softened slightly, "we're trying to build something different than what came before. Aren't we?" "We are," Ethan confirmed, understanding her meaning. "We're not monsters. We don't kill helplessly bound enemies." He stepped closer to the enforcer, staying carefully out of reach. "You came here to kill us. We could return the favor. Instead, we're going to release you with a message for your masters." "I will not be a messenger for abominations," the enforcer spat. "Then don't think of it as being our messenger," Ethan replied. "Think of it as you reporting back exactly what you found. Which is this: the Crimson Eclipse Covenant has returned. We're not hiding. We're not fleeing. We're offering the Alliance one chance and only one, to negotiate rather than fight. We know what they've been hiding. We have evidence of their continued supernatural operations, their experiments, their lies. We can expose everything." "You're threatening to reveal classified information to the public," the enforcer said. "That's treason." "Only if you accept the Alliance's authority as absolute," Seraphine countered. "We don't. We recognize older laws, older oaths. And we're offering a chance for peace, however slim. Your masters can meet with us under truce, or they can continue attacking and we'll make their secrets public. Those are the options." The enforcer's multifaceted eyes studied them both. Whatever processing was happening in his augmented mind took several seconds. Finally, message received. "I will deliver it. Know that this changes nothing. The Alliance has maintained order for 3 centuries. We will not permit a return to the chaos that preceded the cleansing." "Then your master should talk to us," Ethan said. "Because chaos is coming regardless. The supernatural balance is breaking down, your own intelligence confirms it. You can face it with us as allies or you can face it while fighting us as enemies. But you will face it." He nodded to Seraphine, who spoke a command. The binding wards released. The enforcer staggered, then straightened, his weapon disappearing back into whatever dimensional pocket it had emerged from. 3 days, he said. "If you're genuine about negotiation, display a signal, white light at the cathedral's highest point at midnight. We'll send a representative. If you're not genuine, if this is a trap, we'll deploy overwhelming force. These are the terms. Accepted," Seraphine said before Ethan could respond. 3 days. Midnight. White light. We'll be here. The enforcer looked at them both one final time, his insectal eyes unreadable. Then he dissolved back into shadow and was gone, having left the same way he'd entered. Ethan let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Did we just negotiate with the people trying to kill us? We just survived our first major engagement and converted it into a potential diplomatic opening, Seraphine corrected, a note of pride in her voice. That was well done, Ethan. The command authority, the defensive activation, the terms you offered, all exactly right. You're a natural at this. I'm terrified and improvising constantly. Yes, that's leadership in war. She moved to him, taking his face in her hands. The old covenant had centuries to build political structures and command hierarchies. We have days. Which means we both need to learn to make impossible decisions quickly. And you're doing it. I'm proud of you. Ethan leaned into her touch, drawing comfort from the contact. Do you think they'll actually negotiate? I think they're curious. The enforcer could have kept fighting, called his backup, tried to overwhelm us. Instead, he accepted terms and left. That suggests someone in the Alliance command structure is at least willing to hear us out. Seraphine's expression darkened. It also means someone in that structure is pragmatic enough to recognize we're a genuine threat. Which makes them more dangerous, not less. 3 days, Ethan mused. We need to prepare. Gather more intelligence. Find allies. Make ourselves strong enough that negotiation is the only rational choice. Exactly. Seraphine released him, moving back to their planning table where the stolen documents were still displayed. Which brings us to the next step. These locations where your alliance has detected supernatural activity, we need to reach out. Find survivors. Offer them sanctuary here or alliance at minimum. The more of us that stand together, the harder we are to eliminate. And the more legitimate we become, Ethan added, his analytical mind engaging with the political dimension. Right now we're two individuals easy to dismiss as anomalies. But if we're speaking for a coalition of supernatural survivors? If we can demonstrate that we represent a significant population? That changes the equation. They spent the next hours planning their outreach. The stolen intelligence gave them coordinates, but approaching other supernatural entities was delicate work. Some had survived by being paranoid. Some had been driven to madness or violence by centuries of persecution. Some might view Seraphine and Ethan as Alliance agents attempting infiltration. I'll need to go personally, Seraphine decided. A war bride showing herself openly, that's a powerful symbol. But you can't come, you'd be vulnerable. No, Ethan said firmly. We established that we're partners. I'm not hiding in the cathedral while you take all the risks. Besides, having a human vouching for you might actually help. Proof that not all of humanity sides with the Alliance. Seraphine studied him, then nodded slowly. Together then. But carefully. The first contact will set the tone for everything that follows. Their first target was a location in the suburban manufacturing sector. An old factory complex where the Alliance had detected magical signatures consistent with vampire activity. According to the intelligence, they'd investigated but found nothing, suggesting whoever was there was skilled at hiding. Seraphine and Ethan made the journey at night, moving through the city's margins where surveillance was thinnest. Ethan wore nondescript clothing, nothing that would identify him. Seraphine had reluctantly agreed to cover her distinctive armor with a long coat, though her covenant blade remained at her side. The factory was exactly as depressing as Ethan had imagined, abandoned decades ago when automation made the facility obsolete, left to decay because suburban areas weren't priorities for redevelopment. They entered through a gap in the fence, moving through spaces filled with rusting machinery and broken windows. Someone's here, Seraphine murmured. I can sense them. Vampire definitely. Multiple individuals. They know we're here too. Should we announce ourselves? Already doing it. She raised her voice, speaking in that ancient language. The words echoed through the factory, formal and commanding. For a long moment, nothing. Then figures emerged from the shadows. 4 of them, vampires all, but different from Seraphine. Thinner, more feral, their eyes glowing with hunger rather than the controlled power Seraphine displayed. They wore scavenged clothing, moved with twitchy alertness, and stared at Seraphine with expressions mixing awe and suspicion. One of them, a woman with short dark hair and burned scars on her arms, spoke in heavily accented English. "War bride. We heard the cathedral's awakening. Felt it in our blood. Thought it was a trick. Alliance trap." "No trick," Seraphine replied gently. "The Crimson Eclipse Covenant has returned. I am Seraphine Blackthorn and I'm offering sanctuary to all who wish it. The cathedral is protected, warded, safe. And I'm building something new, not just survival but resistance. Partnership with humans who reject the Alliance's lies." "Humans?" The scarred woman's gaze shifted to Ethan with open hostility. "You bring a human here? To us?" "I am her bond partner," Ethan said, fighting to keep his voice steady under that predatory stare. "The Covenant Stone recognized me. We're married by laws older than the Alliance. I'm not your enemy." "All humans are our enemies," one of the others snarled. "They hunted us. Burned us. We survived by hiding and feeding on their refuse." "Because the Alliance made you into this," Seraphine said, and her voice carried the weight of command. "They took you from communities and turned you into scavengers. But that's not who we are. That's not who we have to be. I'm offering you a choice. Stay here, surviving but never truly living, or join me. Stand openly. Fight back. Reclaim what the cleansing took from us." The four vampires looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, the scarred woman spoke again. "If we come, if we join you, what do you ask in return?" "Loyalty to the Covenant. Adherence to our laws. We do not prey on humans without consent. We do not create thralls. We defend those under our protection." Seraphine's expression softened. "And in return you get a home. Safety. A war bride who will fight for you as fiercely as I would have fought for my sisters 300 years ago. You'll never be alone again." There was a long silence. Then, one by one, the four vampires knelt, a gesture of submission and respect that clearly meant something significant. The scarred woman spoke. "We accept. We join the Crimson Eclipse Covenant. We'll fight with you, war bride." Seraphine's smile was radiant. "Then rise. You're under my protection now. Come. I'll show you the cathedral, introduce you properly, and we'll begin planning for what comes next." As they led the four vampires back through the city toward the cathedral, Ethan felt something profound settle in his chest. They'd done it. They'd made the first real alliance, converted survivors into allies. It was a small start, but it was a start. The war was coming. But they wouldn't face it alone. The 3 days before the scheduled negotiation passed in a blur of activity. The four vampires they'd recruited, Elena, Marcus, Yuki, and Thomas, proved invaluable. They knew the suburban territories intimately, having survived there for decades. Through them, Seraphine and Ethan made contact with more survivors. 2 more vampires, a werewolf who'd thought himself the last of his kind, and a human woman named Claire who possessed genuine magical talent and had been hiding it her entire life. By the time midnight of the 3rd day arrived, the cathedral was no longer home to just 2 but to 9 individuals united by shared purpose and shared danger. They'd trained together, shared stories, and begun the delicate work of building trust across species lines that the Alliance had severed 3 centuries ago. Now, standing at the cathedral's highest accessible point, a platform that had once held a bell, now empty, Ethan and Seraphine prepared to signal their willingness to negotiate. Ethan held a modified light source, enchanted by Claire and Seraphine working together to produce the purest white light possible. "Last chance to reconsider," Seraphine murmured. "Once we do this, we're committed. No more hiding." "We stopped hiding the moment we reunited the stone," Ethan replied. "This is just making it official." He activated the light. White radiance flooded upward, piercing through the layers of old city and new, bright enough to be visible even from the surface despite the depth of the cathedral. Through the bond, Ethan felt Seraphine's mixture of pride and anxiety. They were offering peace, but peace from a position of strength. The Alliance would have to decide if they were pragmatic enough to accept it. They waited. Minutes stretched. The light continued to shine. And then, a figure descended from above, moving through the air with technological assistance. Some form of anti-gravity harness. Not an enforcer this time, but a woman in formal Alliance diplomatic corps attire, middle-aged, her expression carefully neutral. She touched down on the platform with practiced ease. "I am Ambassador Chen of the Alliance Supernatural Affairs Division," she announced, her voice crisp and professional. "I'm authorized to discuss terms. May we speak privately?" "This is private," Seraphine replied. "And we speak together. My bond partner and I are a unified authority." Ambassador Chen's gaze flicked between them, assessing. "Very well. The Alliance acknowledges your awakening. We're prepared to offer relocation to a designated safe zone, full medical evaluation and witness protection in exchange for your cooperation and the return of stolen classified materials." "Absolutely not," Ethan said flatly. "We're not criminals seeking amnesty. We're representatives of a resurgent covenant seeking diplomatic recognition. The covenants were dissolved under the cleansing accords." "Accords we never signed," Seraphine countered. "You can't dissolve organizations by unilateral declaration and military force, then claim legal authority over their survivors. That's conquest, not law." Ambassador Chen's expression tightened. "The alternative is renewed conflict. Surely you don't want that." "What we want," Ethan said, "is a seat at the table. Formal recognition of supernatural citizens' rights. An end to the lie that magic and non-human species no longer exist. And Alliance cooperation in addressing whatever's causing the supernatural balance to deteriorate. You're asking for the complete restructuring of the social order." "No," Seraphine corrected. "We're asking you to acknowledge reality publicly instead of just privately. You know we exist, you have an entire division dedicated to us. You know magic is real, you weaponize it. You know the barriers between realities are weakening, your own intelligence confirms it. We're asking you to stop pretending otherwise and work with us to address the actual threats." Ambassador Chen was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer, more genuine. "Do you have any idea what public revelation would do? The panic? The social upheaval? The Alliance maintains the current structure because the alternative is chaos. The Alliance maintains the current structure because it benefits from monopolizing power," Ethan replied. "But that monopoly is breaking down whether you acknowledge it or not. Things are waking up. Ancient powers are stirring. You can face that with allies who understand the supernatural world intimately, or you can face it alone while wasting resources fighting us. Choose." "I'll convey your position to the Council," Ambassador Chen said carefully. "But understand, there are factions within the Alliance who will view any recognition of your legitimacy as existential threat. They'll push for military solution." "Then you'd better make a compelling case for the diplomatic one," Seraphine said. "Because we're not going away and every day we grow stronger. More survivors are joining us. We're building something that can't be erased with force." Ambassador Chen nodded slowly. 1 week. "I'll return in 1 week with the Council's response. In the meantime, we're declaring a ceasefire. No Alliance action against your people, no action from you against Alliance assets." "Agreed." "Agreed," Ethan and Seraphine said in unison. The ambassador activated her harness and rose back into the night sky, disappearing into the darkness. Ethan deactivated the light, and he and Seraphine stood together in the sudden quiet. "We did it," Ethan breathed. "Actual negotiation. With the Alliance." "We bought time," Seraphine corrected. But she was right. There will be factions that reject any peaceful resolution. We need to use this week to prepare for war while hoping for peace. She turned to him, her crimson eyes intense. "Can you accept that? That we might have to fight, that people might die, that this might end in blood despite our best efforts?" "I can," Ethan said and meant it. "Because the alternative is surrendering to a system built on oppression and lies. Because what we're building here," he gestured to the cathedral below where their small coalition waited, "this is worth fighting for. A place where humans and supernatural beings work together openly. That's worth the risk." Seraphine kissed him then, fierce and claiming, and Ethan kissed back with equal intensity. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you," Seraphine said, the words surprising them both. "I didn't expect to. 3 centuries alone, I'd convinced myself I was beyond such feelings. But the stone knew. It sent me exactly who I needed. Not just a bond partner for war, but someone to live for." "I love you too," Ethan replied, the truth of it settling into his bones. "This started as the strangest awakening of my life. Now I can't imagine facing any of this without you." They returned to the cathedral together, descending to where their allies waited. Elena, Marcus, Yuki, Thomas, the werewolf, Jacob, Claire the human mage, all of them looking to Seraphine and Ethan for leadership, for hope, for direction. "We have a week," Seraphine announced. "The Alliance is considering our terms. In that time we train, we fortify, we recruit any other survivors we can find. Because whether they choose peace or war, we'll be ready." The week that followed was the most intense of Ethan's life. During the day he worked with Claire to catalog and analyze the stolen intelligence, identifying priority targets and potential allies. During the evening he trained with Seraphine and Jacob, learning combat techniques that blended human strategy with supernatural capability. And during the night he and Seraphine led recruitment missions, bringing in 3 more vampires, another human mage, and something called a Twilight Fae who'd been hiding in the city's parks for 50 years. By the time Ambassador Chin returned, their coalition numbered 15, and the cathedral had been transformed into both sanctuary and fortress. Wards layered upon wards. Training grounds established. A war room set up with all their intelligence displayed. They'd become a genuine resistance in just 7 days. Ambassador Chin arrived at midnight exactly, once again descending to the platform where Ethan and Seraphine waited. This time her expression was grave. "The council has made its decision," she said without preamble. "You're to be offered limited provisional recognition. The Alliance will acknowledge the existence of a supernatural liaison program, with you as initial representatives. In exchange, you'll provide intelligence on supernatural threats, submit to Alliance oversight, and cease all recruitment activities." "Liaison program," Ethan repeated. "So we'd essentially be controlled opposition. Given token recognition while remaining under your authority. It's more than you had before." "It's not enough," Seraphine said flatly. "We want full autonomous recognition. The right to self-governance. Alliance cooperation as equals, not subordinates. The Council won't accept those terms. They view them as too destabilizing." "Then we're at an impasse," Ethan said. "We won't submit to being controlled. We've spent too long watching the Alliance control the narrative, control access to truth, control who gets to exist openly. That's over." Ambassador Chen's expression was genuinely regretful. "Then I'm sorry. Truly. The alternative directive is military pacification. Enforcer Division is authorized to proceed with overwhelming force. You'll be given 48 hours to evacuate non-combatants. After that, they're coming for the cathedral." "Let them come," Seraphine said, her voice cold. "We'll be waiting." The 48 hours of grace period were spent in frantic preparation. Ethan worked with Claire and the other mages to enhance the cathedral's wards to maximum strength, layering defensive spells until the entire structure thrummed with protective power. Seraphine trained their fighters relentlessly, drilling combat formations and emergency protocols. Jacob, the werewolf, used his knowledge of the city to establish escape routes and supply caches. And Ethan made a decision that terrified him but felt necessary. "I'm going public," he announced to the War Council on the evening of the second day. "I have access to the archive's stolen intelligence. I'm going to release it to every news network, every independent journalist, every forum that will carry it. The Alliance's crimes, their cover-ups, their continued supernatural operations, all of it. That will make you an even bigger target," Elena warned. "I'm already a target. We all are. But if we're going to fight, we fight on every front, military, political, and informational. The public deserves to know what their government has been hiding." Seraphine studied him, then nodded. "Do it. Let the truth be our first strike." Ethan spent 6 hours crafting the data release, packaging the evidence in formats designed for maximum impact, creating redundant distribution systems that couldn't be easily shut down, writing a manifesto that explained their position and their demands. At midnight, exactly when the Alliance's deadline began, he released everything simultaneously across 24 platforms. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, the documents were being shared, analyzed, discussed. The proof was undeniable. The Alliance had been maintaining extensive supernatural operations while publicly denying such things existed. They'd been experimenting on captured entities, weaponizing magic, and systematically eliminating populations they claimed were extinct. Ethan watched the feeds in the cathedral's command center, seeing the public consciousness shift in real time. Anger. Demands for explanation. The Alliance's carefully constructed narrative cracking under the weight of evidence. It's working, Claire breathed. People are listening. And the Alliance is panicking, Jacob added, pointing to official channels where increasingly desperate damage control statements were being issued. But they'd also triggered the response they'd expected. Through the cathedral's wards, Seraphine sensed the approach. They're here. Multiple enforcers. Dozens of them. And conventional military assets. They're not taking chances. Everyone moved to positions. They're 15 fighters against what sensors suggested was a force of at least 50 enhanced enforcers plus support units. The odds were terrible. But they'd known they would be. The attack began with an artillery strike. Not conventional weapons but something that screamed toward the cathedral with magical and technological signatures intertwined. The wards caught it, dissipating the energy in a shower of sparks that lit up the underground chamber. But Ethan could feel the strain, that had been a probing strike, testing their defenses. Here they come, Seraphine said, her covenant blade blazing to life in her hand. Enforcers poured into the cathedral through multiple entry points, their enhanced bodies allowing them to breach passages that should have been impassable. But each entry point funneled them into kill zones Seraphine and Jacob had carefully prepared. The supernatural fighters met them with fury born of 3 centuries of persecution, fighting for the first home they'd known in generations. Ethan fought too, his covenant blade singing in his hands, the training Seraphine had given him translating into deadly efficiency. He wasn't as strong as the full vampires or Jacob's werewolf form, but he was faster than any normal human, and the blade cut through enforcer armor like it was paper. The battle raged for what felt like hours. Enforcers fell, but so did defenders. Marcus went down to a concentrated energy blast. Yuki was overwhelmed by 3 enforcers working in coordination. Each loss Ethan felt like a physical wound, people he'd trained with and fought beside now dead. But they were holding. The cathedral's wards were taking punishment but holding. And outside, Ethan knew from the feeds Claire was monitoring, the public was watching. The Alliance had tried to jam communications, but the cathedral's position deep underground ironically protected their broadcasts. Signals leaked out through old city infrastructure, reaching the surface from unexpected locations. People were seeing the battle in real time. Seeing enhanced government soldiers attacking what was clearly a sanctuary. Seeing the defenders fighting desperately for survival. The narrative was shifting. Then the main force arrived. Ethan felt it before he saw it. A massive magical signature approaching from above, something powerful enough to make the cathedral's wards scream in warning. The ceiling above the main chamber shattered, and a figure descended wreathed in power. He was clearly once human but had gone far beyond the standard enforcer modifications. His body was a fusion of flesh and technology and magic, glowing with contained energy, radiating authority and threat. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. I am Director Masterson of the Enforcer Division. You will surrender immediately or be destroyed. This is your only warning. This is our home, Seraphine called back, bloodied but unbowed. You have no authority here. I have the authority of 300 years of precedent and the full backing of the Alliance Council. You're terrorists, criminals, and anomalies. Surrender or die. We're citizens, Ethan shouted, stepping forward despite Seraphine's protective gesture. We have rights. We deserve recognition. And the entire world is watching you try to murder us for demanding them. Director Masterson's gaze fixed on Ethan. The human. the one who released classified intelligence. You'll be tried and executed for treason. Only if you can catch me, Ethan replied. And only if your government survives the scandal of executing someone for revealing the truth. For a moment, everything hung in balance. Then Director Masterson raised his hand, power gathering around him, preparing to unleash something that would likely shatter the cathedral's remaining defenses. And the ground beneath him exploded. Not from any attack the defenders had launched, but from something else, something deeper. The supernatural balance Seraphine and the Alliance's own intelligence had warned about, it had finally broken completely. A rift tore open in reality itself and things came through. Ancient things. Nightmare things. Entities that made even Director Masterson's enhanced form look fragile. The battle stopped as both sides faced this new threat. Creatures of shadow and hunger poured through the rift, attacking indiscriminately. An enforcer was torn apart by something with too many limbs. One of the nightmare creatures turned toward the remaining defenders, and Elena managed to destroy it with a blast of power Ethan didn't know she possessed. Containment breach. Someone was screaming over Alliance communications. Reality fracture. We need immediate evacuation. But Director Masterson stood his ground, redirecting his gathered power toward the rift. All units forget the targets. Priority is containing this breach. He looked at Seraphine and for a moment, enemy acknowledged enemy with grim understanding. War Bride. Can your ward seal this? From inside maybe? Seraphine shouted back. But we'd need to close it from both sides. Push from here while you compress from outside. It was insane. It required trusting each other. But the alternative was watching reality itself tear apart. Do it. Masterson commanded. What followed was the strangest collaboration Ethan had ever witnessed. Supernatural beings and enhanced government soldiers working together, pouring their combined power into sealing a breach between worlds. Seraphine directed the cathedral's wards inward, forcing the rift closed. Claire and the mages channeled their power into her working. Masterson and his enforcers hit the breach from the outside with overwhelming technological force. The rift resisted. The entities still coming through fought frantically to keep it open. But slowly, inch by inch, the combined assault forced it closed. With a sound like reality itself screaming, the breach sealed. Silence fell over the battlefield. Both sides stood exhausted, bloodied, surrounded by their dead and wounded. The rift was gone, but its implications remained. The supernatural balance had broken. More breaches would come. The old world was gone. A new one, more dangerous and more honest, had arrived. Director Masterson looked at the carnage around him, then at Seraphine and Ethan. His expression was unreadable through his augmentations. Finally he spoke. Stand down. All enforcer units, cease offensive operations. Withdraw to defensive perimeter and await further orders. He turned to Seraphine. It seems we have more to discuss, War Bride. 3 months after the Battle of the Cathedral, as it had come to be known, Ethan stood in a place he'd never thought he'd see, a formal conference chamber in the Alliance's central governance building. He wore formal attire that felt strange after months of combat readiness, and beside him stood Seraphine in full ceremonial regalia, her War Bride armor polished to perfection. Across the table sat Ambassador Chin, Director Masterson, and a dozen other Alliance officials. The negotiations had been brutal and exhausting, but they'd finally reached an agreement that both sides could accept. The Crimson Eclipse Covenant would receive autonomous recognition as a sovereign entity within New Athens. Supernatural citizens would have the right to register openly or remain private as they chose. The Alliance would declassify significant portions of their supernatural intelligence and begin public education programs. And most importantly, a joint task force, combining Alliance resources with Covenant magical expertise, would be established to address the reality breaches that were occurring with increasing frequency. It wasn't everything they'd wanted. The Alliance retained significant power. Restrictions remained. But it was a beginning, a genuine change in the structure that had oppressed supernatural beings for 3 centuries. This is historic, Ambassador Chin said as the final documents were signed and sealed. The first treaty between the Alliance and a recognized supernatural entity since the cleansing. Your descendants will remember this day. Our descendants will judge whether we did enough, Seraphine replied. But it's a start. Thank you for having the courage to negotiate rather than continuing to fight. Thank your bond partner, Director Masterson said, his tone grudging but respectful. His intelligence release made continued secrecy impossible. You gave us no choice but to adapt or collapse. Effective strategy. Ethan nodded acknowledgement. I'm an archivist. I understand the power of information. Though I never imagined using it quite this way. You're more than an archivist now, Shin observed. You're a revolutionary. A bridge between species. What will you do next? Ethan glanced at Seraphine and through their bond felt her love and pride. We'll continue what we started. Build the covenant into something strong enough to protect our people. Train the next generation. Explore the reality breaches and find ways to stabilize them. And, he smiled, maybe take a vacation. I haven't slept properly in months. Vacation, Seraphine repeated, her expression amused. How mundane. How wonderfully, perfectly mundane. She stood and the others rose with her. Gentleman Ambassador, until our next council session. May the balance hold. They left the governance building together, emerging into New Athens's midday sun. Seraphine still wore her concealing cloak out of habit, but now it was choice rather than necessity. Supernatural citizens were beginning to emerge openly, cautiously testing the new legal protections. It would take time for society to adapt, but change was happening. Did we do the right thing? Ethan asked as they walked. Forcing this confrontation, risking so many lives? We did the necessary thing, Seraphine replied. The old order was dying whether we acted or not. At least this way we had a voice in what came next. She took his hand. And we did it together. War bride and human. Partner and partner. Exactly as the Crimson Eclipse Covenant always believed it should be. They returned to the cathedral, which was no longer hidden but had become an official embassy of sorts. Neutral ground where Alliance and Covenant could meet. Elena greeted them at the entrance, alive despite her wounds from the battle and now serving as captain of the Cathedral Guard. Claire had taken over intelligence operations. Jacob ran community outreach to other supernatural survivors still in hiding. The cathedral hummed with life and purpose, exactly as it should. That evening, in the private chambers they shared, Ethan and Seraphine finally allowed themselves to simply exist without crisis, without planning, without the weight of revolution. They lay together in comfortable silence, the bond between them a constant warm presence. I slept alone, Ethan murmured. I woke up to find a vampire war bride in my bed. It was terrifying. And now? Seraphine asked, amusement in her voice. Now I can't imagine sleeping any other way. He turned to face her, meeting those crimson eyes that had once frightened him and now felt like home. I love you. I love this life we're building. I love that we're making a difference. I love you too, Seraphine replied, kissing him gently. My husband. My partner. My unexpected gift after 3 centuries of darkness. They held each other as night fell over New Athens, the city that was finally beginning to acknowledge all its citizens, human and supernatural alike. Outside, the world was changing, dangerous and uncertain. Reality itself was becoming unstable, ancient powers were awakening, and countless challenges lay ahead. But in this moment, in the cathedral that had survived the cleansing and now stood as a symbol of new possibilities, Ethan Cole and Seraphine Blackthorne had everything they needed. Each other, a purpose worth fighting for, and the absolute certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. The story was far from over. It was only beginning. But for tonight, they had earned their rest, their peace, and their happiness. And tomorrow, when the sun rose on their new world, they would rise with it, ready for whatever came next.